Welcome back to WFS Live, powered by Ronaldo. And I tell you what, talking about power, we're in the middle of a power pack day. This is going to be session 5 of 6. We've had the workshop before. We've got the Brazil room panels afterwards. And of course, we welcome your interaction, not just with this session through track questions and polls, but also on social media. Please do tag us in and tell us what you think of this event and spread the word for us as well on Twitter, WF Summit, on Instagram, World Football Summit. All one word, all the characters. And do please just let us know and get involved with the discussion. We're going to be pivoting now into just a little look back at what's been happening since we went into lockdown with the coronavirus pandemic, and now as we emerge from it with some absolutely stellar speakers. You might remember them from the Talking Sports series that we did recently over the last couple of months. So for a while, it felt that sport was paralysed by coronavirus. The best that we could hope for was that the current seasons would just be scrapped and a clean slate for the start of the new ones, whenever that would be. But as it turns out, sport is defiant, sport is resourceful. And one thing is for sure, we will never take it for granted ever again. Bundesliga back on the 16th of May, La Liga back on the 11th of June, Premier League back on the 17th of June, Serie A on the 20th of June, golf back on the PGA Tour, Super Rugby even has fans in stadia, which you believe in New Zealand. MLS will go again with their special tournament in Florida, and NBA will do likewise to conclude their campaign. So sport is fighting back, and we hope that will continue. Now, everyone, of course, is establishing what their new normal looks like. At the very least, the time that we've had at home has afforded us just a little bit more of that precious commodity of time. Some sports have spent that time strategizing, working out the pivot they need, and maybe accelerating a change that was already in the pipeline to change their sport for the better. So what can we distill from this first month back or so after the lockdown? Are there any trends developing? And of course, the biggest question is what happens next? As I mentioned, top panel of experts and crystal ball gazers for this next round table. And here they are, the group CEO at 11 Sports. We saw him yesterday, Luis Vicente. Welcome back, Luis. A director of Facebook Sports, Peter Hutton. Hello there, Peter. Co-CEO at ESL Gaming's Ralf Reichert, and Vice President of Global Sports and Entertainment Partnerships at Coca-Cola, Ricardo Fort. And last but certainly by no means least, your moderator, CEO of 7 League, Richard Ayers. Richard, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us. I can see you all in the chat, and thank you to the illustrious panel for joining us as well. So we have a relatively short period of time with a potentially massive topic to cover. I'm Richard Ayers, I'm from 7 League. I won't do a big introduction. We're quite good, some people think. If you don't know about us, please do get in touch. We'd love to talk to you. But really the job today is to be looking at what are the lockdown learnings? What are the things that we can take from it? The only change is the only constant, that's what they say, and we're certainly living through a time for change. A little bit of housekeeping. If either of our, any of our speakers get a little bit carried away, bearing in mind we've only got 45 minutes and much to talk about, carried away will be 1 yellow card. And if they continue to offend, then I have the red card ready to go, just so you know. And those of you who have watched these sessions before, you know who we're talking about. So a little bit of context, which is there are going to be all manner of impacts across so many different types of areas. If you're running a domestic league or involved in a domestic league, you know, the contract terms are generally shorter, they are more frequent, and therefore there's going to be more stress around those contract cycles. If you're a rights holder, well, you've only got to look at the Football Association in the UK, who are going to have to make significant cuts to staff. And then yesterday it was announced that the rugby, the RFU in the UK, also in England rather, also making significant changes to their numbers of staff because of massive revenue impact. And then you've also got, you know, the atmosphere. Let's face it, the value of the atmosphere is fundamental to the nature of sport, and that has been taken away. But at the same time, you have people like the NBA still getting 80% of the engagement online that they were getting when there were games during the season. So managing to be able to buck that trend. And of course, it's not just about football. I can give you a couple of examples that are doing really quite well out of the effects in the UK. One of those being canoeing, who have seen incredible growth in the number of people who want to get on the water with their families. A lot of families moving that way. And if you want to buy a bicycle in the UK at the moment, you will struggle because everybody has decided that getting on their bike is the way to stay fit and get healthy. And of course, online, we're seeing a change. So Twitch, for example, a lot of music, particularly gigging bands of a smaller status, they've moved online so they can work their way through Twitch. And I'm sure that we'll hear from Ralf that ESL has been seeing sort of changes and growth and development in terms of online gaming, online entertainment experience. So there's so much going on. We're going to try and dig into as much of it as we possibly can. Things to focus around, I think the areas, around your questions, we'll be running some polls, but of course, areas that you might want to question around. So consumption, so consumer behaviors, how are they changed? How are they going to change? Participation, for example, is that going to be a real troublesome area for a year or two or more? The media, sponsorships, and of course, rights holders themselves. There are many, many ways in which the impacts are going to be felt. There are winners and losers in the current crisis. I would say that online streaming services are doing quite well. Online conferencing services will have been doing very well. We've all seen the numbers of Zoom and others grow like crazy. From my personal experience, I would say alcohol consumption has gone up quite a bit. Not in my case, but in the case of many.
Very British for you.
That you need to shave your hair. Yeah, very British. Like, it's a Northern European thing. We've resorted to alcohol at home. Disney Plus has done well, etc., etc. But let me start off, Ralf. Seeing as you started this, give us an example of somebody who you think sort of surprised you almost, a winner or a loser in this scenario.
Well, beer consumption in Germany is very much down. Actually, there was news last week that beer consumption is down like by 20% or something like that. So. No, I think you started to touch it, right? I think everything that is kind of personal sport and canoeing, I would more consider something you do, a leisure sport, right? Bicycle. I'm riding more bicycle than ever as well, so I can very much relate to that. I think everything where you participate yourself, and it's not mass participatory, it's on the very bottom of the food chain, I think is very much up. Everything in the middle, which is mass participation, right? The New York Marathon, all the marathon basically have been cancelled. All the bigger events where you need, where you don't have professional athletes only, they are in big trouble. I think, in even motor racing and all that stuff in the middle layer, I think it's catastrophic. That will have a big impact. And then you started as well, and all the top sports, they're actually recovering fast. Because they have a purpose, a media product to push out, and that is they have the means to do so, and that's working, and people are watching. And I've seen Liverpool and Klopp making the championship.
Peter, you're over on the West Coast there, are you? And yet I know that you're focused on your beloved. Oh my goodness, I'm going to get the wrong team. Your beloved team, but
Derby. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
No one could get that wrong. But yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of winners and losers?
Oh, well, definitely a loser for me in terms of watching Derby since the comeback, because this plethora of kickoff times means they keep kicking off at 4:30 in the morning California time. So that bit's not been good. On the positive side, I think the home fitness business has exploded. And you look at the numbers that Peloton and Swift and that really all those fitness trainers that are taking their business online, they've done really well. We've seen a real explosion on our platform of people using live streaming to continue their business, and people like Overtime in particular have lent in really well. On the negative, I think the job cuts are hugely depressing in the industry. You mentioned the cases in the UK, but it's clearly a worldwide phenomenon. And we see often our points of contact at organisations are being furloughed or let go. The situation in Australia, I think, particularly bad, and it's really depressing because it's often the people in the future-looking parts of the business, the online business, who are actually facing some of the short-term problems, which doesn't really make sense. But you understand that every business has to make their own economic choices, and I think that's a really sort of sad piece that is coming out more and more week by week. And the more that we can do to help people keep going in the business, to help the sports organisations live through this period, I think that's a really important area for us.
I saw somebody put out a rather nice graphic, which was the one factor that has been most powerful in forcing digital transformation through our organization has been option A, the CEO, option B, COO, option C, COVID. And of course, COVID is the thing that has driven a remarkable amount of acceleration. And Luis, are you seeing that? I mean, Peter was mentioning the digital transformation, the digital people, and are you seeing digital transformation accelerate or be hindered? I mean, what's the change?
No, I think first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for watching us, and thank you for this panel to be together again. I say that for me, COVID has been the burning accelerator of digital transformation. I think it's basically anticipating and forcing, a lot of companies, businesses to change. Of course, there is a very dark side, all the drama, the sad stories we've been seeing, many people that are still fighting for their lives, many communities that feel more deprived. When you look at our industry, at sports, I think there's also massive problems, especially, when you talk about, second tier, sports, when you talk about mid-size, and small size leagues, in football, even in football, the biggest sport in the world. But I definitely think that there's a lot of behaviors that finally now are up and running and are a priority. Definitely forced by the situation we are, which again based as well on what we already discussed a few weeks ago. I think there is a burning problem around the volatility of the business model that sustains the entire sports industry, and definitely there is a clear attempt to solve that and to find other solutions and additional solutions that will make the industry more strong and stable.
Thank you. Ricardo, you're very close to the industry, but not actually, in the inside of sports governance, sports organizations. What are you seeing around that sort of business adapting to the stresses and the challenges?
Well, good to share the screen with my good friends again. Well, I think that in some shape or form, we are all losers because the crisis has impacted everyone in different ways. When it comes to specifically the sporting consumption, the closer you are to live events, the more you lost or the more you are losing. Sponsors are impacted in a different way, and depending where you are in the food chain, if you are long-term, global, you are less impacted than if you are local, as you described, Richard. But at the same time, I see a lot of new creative things happening, and in particular, the Olympic athletes have done a very good job in using digital platforms to engage with their fans. In the absence of live events, in the absence of competition, I've seen them upgrading their engagement and their participation through all the social platforms, which I think it's great. In our industry, if you don't look at the top 5 football leagues, the wealthy leagues, there are a lot of players in football alone that lost their jobs, they are out of action, and that's been going on for some time now. So there are a lot of very concrete negative implications for athletes, for clubs, for leagues that we don't talk a lot because they're not happening in the top 5 football markets. But as with everything else, we're optimistic as we see all of the leagues coming back and the other sports coming back. Some better than others, but it gives us hope that soon everybody will be in the same place again.
Ricardo, is there some challenge here that it's all very well for sport to start putting on matches, games, competitions again, but you can't get the fans in the arena. You can't make up for the hole that has been created for 3 or 4 months. There's all sorts of different pressures, both the internal pressures with staff, but also external pressures for sponsors. I mean, it's not just going to flick back to normal, is it?
Well, I'm not a futurologist, but I'll say it doesn't look like it's going to go back to what was before, which highlights the importance of having good access to content so that you can use the action that is happening on a fan-free venue to tell stories to everyone else. And as long as we can do this, the action in on-site is not the critical piece of the puzzle. It's great to have sports back. No, the experience of watching football with empty venues is not the best, but that content can be very helpful and can be very good for brands to tell the stories elsewhere. So while we are very focused on what's happening on site, it's we have to step back and say, okay, so what really matters here is the content, is the action, is the sport. And let's take this and use in a different way, use in a more creative way, using through the digital platforms to tell stories of what's happening at the match and around the match. So this is what we are trying to do.
And we've been seeing a lot of our clients really have to dig in and work hard to change the inventory and the offering that they have to give to sponsors. Some of those sponsors are, maybe they started sympathetic, but they're now pretty litigious. They're getting very strong hands with wanting their pound of flesh. How aren't sponsorship contracts going to get sort of ripped up? When people just say, no, this is completely irrelevant, it doesn't work anymore, I'm going to throw it out the window, let's start again.
Well, I think that it's impossible to have an answer across the board, right? So every sponsor, every country, every type of contract is different. What I see happening, at least from our side, is a willingness to work with the industry to solve a problem which is not specific to a right holder, to a sponsor, to a media partner, is a collective problem that together, collectively, we should be able to find a solution. In some cases, there might be contracts that need to be rediscussed because the offers don't exist anymore. So we have to have a conversation. But I think that the more important than a specific contract is we're all on this together, and we're trying to solve a problem that is bigger than everybody individually. And collaboration will be the key to find solutions. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is how can we get something that people love, connect to the brands, and deliver to our consumers? How can I drive consumption of beverages through sports? And that takes some conversations because some of the assets that we acquire may not be available anymore. So we have to work with the partners to find solutions to deliver that.
If I can jump in, I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen so much branded content come out in the last month or so. It's a question of sponsors working with rights holders. Maybe they're not getting the benefits they were originally contracted with, but they're using their relationship, saying we're in this for the long term. How can we extract value now? So you see a huge development in terms of the amount of branded content, certainly on our platforms, and I'm sure elsewhere.
Yeah. And maybe to add a side view on this, right? I mean, I'm not a sponsor, but I watched actually the sponsorship session right before, and whoever we work with, it's always purpose driven, right? I mean, Ricardo can tell the story much better than I do, but brands go into sports for a purpose. Because if you just want to have an ROI discussion, you actually have to go to Facebook or Google. They get a very, very different, much more transparent, very simple, return on investment on your sales. It's much more easier to track, but that might lack the purpose and the connection to something emotional that is bigger than just your ad on some place in the internet. And I feel, and that's what I'm seeing around us, is that partners and sponsors have been working hand in hand with sports all across the board because they went in for a purpose and they want to continue to be there for a purpose. And to tell the story of that purpose is a little bit harder without an audience, but not impossible. And I think, Peter, exactly what you touched, right? Then you go more into content because you don't have that physical experience.
We had a question in the chat from somebody called Will Martin, who was sort of highlighting this point with the interactive experiences becoming more used, more regular in what we're doing. Does that mean things like, with 11 Sports is watched together with Facebook Live or Facebook Venue or Twitch or whatever the platforms? Do those platforms suddenly become much more significant in the conversation? Luis?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Richard. I think interactive, experiences will become, more critical, and they should already been being more critical. I think some rights holders have been more, looking at it in a more difficult way because they still like the more traditional delivery. But I think many commercial partners, and again I think today we have here cities one company that has been very much pushing. Coca-Cola has been very much pushing all the digital engagement, interactive experiences along the way, and I think that's fundamentally important. I think that's again another consequence of COVID. Making sure that people understand, and now they are forced to understand because they cannot activate the stadium the way they used to do. I keep saying saying, the universe of one simple football game is an incredible multi-million, universe of people, around the world. And I think it's about time that we think about what kind of experience, can we bring them? How can we bring them as close as possible to the real action? And I think, there is also, a massive gamification still potential to be used. There is a massive transactional element still to be put into the experience. So I think it's still, I'll say, very much primitive, and I think we can still, move along, very fast and with a massive reach, because there's still a lot to do in this space, and a lot of, basically added value to be generated.
Oh, and it's really,
Peter, your
basic and it's
systems are
needed.
primitive, Peter. Tell me.
Well, hopefully they're developing every day. But I think, the important thing is that we're seeing already that when people can be an active viewer, they stay longer. So if you look at what we do with the Spanish League in India, we have polls, we have interactive chat with commentators involved with viewers. And you see that if someone's involved in the chat, they listen for like 6 times longer. They stay active viewing. And it's not that sort of negative passive viewing that allows you to then go off and look at your phone and do other things. We want to try and keep people in the sporting environment. It's realistic to say they can be in the sporting environment but still doing other things. They can be chatting, they can be taking opinions, they can be voting, they can be betting, and that clearly is the direction of travel. And I think important that we see these initiatives with Twitch and with ourselves and with others as part of that journey that allows a fan to be part of the action and not just sitting receiving the action.
Peter, whilst we're talking, it would be remiss of me not to sort of just give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about a thing that a lot of people in sports say to me is they don't really understand Facebook's place in the world. They sort of say, well, you were kind of dabbling with rights, and then you weren't, and then you're it's all about video, and then it's about community, but also more recently, of course, data privacy issues, and then Black Lives Matter and Stop Hate for Profit. I mean, there's a lot of these challenges around the platform. I mean, never mind the sort of, some people would say there are technical issues around the product, particularly live. But how does Facebook, contribute in particularly to sport, which is so incredible at gluing society together? What's Facebook's role in all of this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it touches on so many different things that we discuss every day. I think, first of all, it's important that when we create initiatives at Facebook, we do things with 3 different aims in mind, which is making it a better experience for a consumer, making it a better experience for a publisher, and making it something that works for Facebook. And as a result, we have to continually trial and work with new things to make that experience better. I think sport and Facebook is a really logical combination because Facebook is fundamentally about communities, and sport is a brilliant way of bringing communities together. And as a result, there's a natural synergy there. I think our role in the industry is multi-faced because of that. We can clearly derive income streams for sports publishers through things like commerce and conversion. We can be part of that branded content conversation. We can start raising advertising revenue shares, as we do with someone like UFC raising over $1 million on the platform through ad revenue shares. And fundamentally, we can exist as an audience development platform that we can go and touch new people all the time and bring them into the sports ecosystem. Clearly, that means that we have a lot of areas to look at and a lot of areas to explain permanently to the sports industry. And as we develop, and we're developing rapidly, it's important that we continually explain where we're going step by step and process by process. But the progress we've made, I think, has been great. I think we're increasingly relevant, and important that we know our place. We're not necessarily going to be out there and wave a magic wand that solves people's rights income, but we can create multiple revenue streams that allows sport to progress and touch with people in a way that is long-term and sustainable.
May I add something, Richard, on that? Because let me just support. So because I think, again, I'm not Facebook, but I do have a strong opinion on Facebook. Again, for many years, again, I've been, I'll say, leading, the fight, from sports against what we used to call the big platforms. But again, I actually have to admit, sports still has a lot to learn, on working with Facebook, and of course, Facebook can always improve. But again, I think it's also time that in the sports industry, we understand actually all the capabilities that Facebook can offer, and of course, and also help Facebook to understand better, the sports ecosystem, our challenges, and trying once and for all. Again, we are friends, we are frenemies, sometimes, but we are definitely friends. And I think, the sports ecosystem is so large and so big, and there is so many ways that we can, improve, that definitely I think that discussion more than ever is a viable discussion to have, and help Facebook to get a better angle on sports, and definitely getting sports better aligned with Facebook and many other platforms that operate in the same space.
Oh, look, I think that fundamental role of us as a free-to-air funnel is important. Bringing people in and just being a sports fans, allowing them to engage more, to have that interactivity with the heroes. I love the fact that, you can now effectively see what your athlete heroes are going through on a day-to-day basis because they post so much. And again, COVID's been a time where you've seen a real explosion in athlete publishing. And authentic athlete publishing is a brilliant way of developing fandom. So, that's been something at least very positive out of this period.
Peter, if I may, I think we need to come back to that athlete thing, because you're absolutely right. That's so powerful. If I may just challenge for a second, when you say free to air, it is free at the point of consumption, but unfortunately, most sports organizations would say it's pay to play platform. And unless I have significant budgets to be able to cut through all the noise, the discoverability isn't there. So, I can stream my live badminton game or table tennis or rugby or anything else for that matter, but it doesn't matter because no one's going to see it because the algorithm will just cut it out unless I put significant money behind it.
I think that's changing, and it's getting better pretty rapidly. If you look at this period, there's been a huge investment by Facebook in live, and live in particular has been something that's grown over this 3-month period. So even really simple steps, like you can now embed a URL, which means if you want to get to my live feed, click here, you'll get to my live feed on Facebook. That's a big step forward, because as you said, it's frustrating if you can't find it, if you can't go there. And I think important that we make it easier and easier for people to find relevant content to them. And you'll see a huge area of curation coming in now into Facebook, and clearly a lot of people focused on how do you get to the content you really care about. And I think that's something that it's really nice to be part of that work stream. And as Louis said, we're sort of a consultancy business in many ways, the sort of 40 people who work on sport at Facebook, in that we're consulting Facebook about how to work with the sports industry and the sports industry on how to work with Facebook. And we've got a long way to go, but I think there's been really significant progress, and hopefully we keep going on that journey.
Great. So let's move on for a second from Facebook, although we could talk about that for hours, no doubt. There is one topic sort of related to the athletes. One of the things that had shone so bright, particularly last year, was women's football in particular, and there was a lot of excitement about the build up to the women's Euros, and there was a lot of energy behind, people supporting and progressing women's football. Some of you may remember women's football. We were quite excited about it last year. What's going on there? Like, how does women's football exist within this? Is that going to be one of the big sufferers? Is it one of the pain points, Luis?
Well, I think there is a massive potential on women's football. I think last year, the unbelievable Women's World Cup was just the beginning. Was just basically, for the first time, really giving women's football a chance to actually have the same means, or almost the same means as men's football, and actually let see what you can do with that. I think the Women's World Cup for me was a trademark, was a landmark, really a pinpoint in what can be the future. Of course, I think it's about time that we get equality, in sports, not just, as a nice thing to say, but actually something that we all, move forward. I have to say that at 11, we're taking this very seriously, and very soon we'll be launching something in this space, which we believe could be very helpful. But I think not just in football, but women's sports is definitely, for me, a massive opportunity. Not let's say from a pure business point of view, but more than anything for everything it represents. And it's about time that we seriously prioritize that. But I think COVID will only, of course, the beginning might be difficult, but only will give conditions to women's sports to accelerate in the very near future.
I think the good thing as well is that economically it is beginning to stand on its own feet. You look at the German Cup final last Saturday, it got a 18% share on ARD, 2.6 million people watching. That's a really good result for a Saturday afternoon women's football game in Germany. And I think you'll see people like FIFA and UEFA allow sponsors to choose to sponsor women's football rather than the bundle of all the FIFA and UEFA package. And I think that will then allow more activation of that sponsorship of women's football. And that has to be a positive trend.
Moving on from the women's football to gaming a little bit, Ralf. So one of the big winners, I would think, but tell us, how are you seeing your numbers reflected as part of COVID, and what are your projections?
Look, yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that we started with transformation, digital transformation. That digital basically is the only way to interact, or has been the only way to interact for the last few months. And that anything digital will have some positive effects from it is clear. And I think gaming as a whole has been underestimated for a while, right? So, I mean, when we talk about esports, I always say, and when I spoke to traditional sports federations as an example, I always tell them, look, you need a gaming strategy first. Don't think about esports yet, right? Esports is an organized way on top of it. Think about your sport. Think about the basics of it. You need a gaming strategy. You need a game. And I mean it, every sport needs a game. That needs to be very right at front and center of what they're doing. And it could be archery, it could be golf, it could be football, of course, it has it, but every sport needs a game. And everyone who went into this prepared kind of, had a good out. I mean, most of the racing stuff went to online competitions pretty fast. So obviously anything gaming, I would say, was the big winner of this. And esports is kind of the logical follower of it. We actually got people like Coca-Cola and Facebook involved in esports by creating these great stadium events because they made it physically touchable. They created an experience that is like traditional sports, actually. So that's missing right now, but good that it's missing now, not 5 years ago where people weren't so serious about esports yet, I say, where a lot of companies didn't strategically go in. All of our partners are strategic partners. They have a strategy to be in esports. And therefore, on the pure sponsorship and partnership level, we've been kind of, we could create viewership actually twice as big as projected before, sometimes even 3 times as big. And that's both in digital channels and as well with our linear contracts we have. So it was up across the board. And that was because we were kind of the only sport that was online. So that was a little bit inevitable. But even going forward, I believe that it goes back to the core product that the sport could and each discipline that's good to watch will have its audience. And when it has its audience, it will have its partners. And there, esports is not better or worse set up than any traditional sport for next year when we go back to normal. But it kind of used the time to be front and center of a lot of people and be a reliable partner to traditional sports, actually, to the fans, which is much more important, to be honest, and to partners in the industry, either it be distribution platforms like Facebook or sponsors like Coca-Cola. So I think esports didn't try to, and we didn't try to, use the time to say, hey, this is traditional sport and they are failing. It was more like, look at us, we do well. So use this as a complementary strategy. And I think that has worked well and will continue to work. And yeah, going back to the beginning, it hopefully opened a lot of eyes for a lot of smaller traditional sports as well to have a gaming strategy. Because I believe that I always go back to my son, the 9-year-old son. He became a fan of football. I told this, Louise, multiple times, right? Because of the game FIFA. And I believe that he will become an archer if there's a great archer game, more likely than, going to an archery place first. I think learning the funnel of what Peter said as Facebook as a free to air funnel for content. I think gaming is a free to air funnel for sports actually as a whole.
Ricardo, are you going to see, as a result of that, some of your contribution to sports and gaming? Are you going to sort of see some budget maybe shifting from sports, which is very COVID challenged, towards gaming and competitive gaming maybe?
We don't look at at the budget allocation as a shift, there has been an increased investment in gaming over the past few years in different initiatives, from advertising placement to placement in games, from a co-development of content with the publishers and use of influencers. So that's a growing movement that is not changing because of the short-term impacts of the crisis. We are doing this because people care about gaming and they care about esports, and we try to reflect and to guide and to be inspired by where they are consuming their content, and gaming has been an important part of it. But I refuse to look at gaming as an alternative to sport. I look at gaming as a complement to sport. So when we think about a project to promote, to activate the FIFA World Cup in Qatar in 2022, I have a gaming component of that project. When I think about the Olympic Games, I have a gaming component of that. So gaming is another expression of the passion points that we try to be associated with.
Great. And do you see that sort of that value that you're getting out? Do we? There's two questions. We've got 5 minutes before we wrap up. But two questions that really I think we need to answer. Are we going to see values of rights go up or go down? The guys are running a poll. The value to broadcasters, overwhelmingly, the people following this feed say overwhelmingly they think that the rights will become more valuable to broadcasters. Do you concur? And secondly, what are the consumer trends? What are the behaviors that we're going to see? Are we going to, as sport, are we going to behave differently towards fans from now on? Peter, I'll start that with you.
I always get the easy questions, right? But I think in terms of the values, it's an interesting question, because you look at the challenges on pay TV around the world, and logically that should depress the values. You look at the cord cutting here in the US, it's sensational. I mean, it's remarkable how fast it's changing. And I think you could see that trend continuing around the world. So there's a logic there that says rights fees will depress. I think there's also, though, the reality of how the sports business operates, which is it's a tremendously sexy area. It's an area that allows behavior change. And as a result, you always see new players arrive, often surprising new players. And you look at the rights inflation over the last few years, it's often driven by those new players. It's Media Pro arriving in France. It's DAZN arriving in multiple places. It's Optus arriving in Australia. So there's a counter to that logical sort of numbers falling argument. But I think, overall the fall of pay TV revenues should mean that there's at least a plateauing of sports rights, and therefore a need to increase revenue through other streams and to permanently be focused on your funnel of audience, because you don't want them only accessing expensive pay or pay-per-view streams. You need to try and bring people through, develop that fandom. As Ralf was saying, gaming is a brilliant way of doing that, making people aware of the stories and the heroes, and that funnel is really important. And the athletes taking part in gaming has definitely been a trend over the last few months, and I think that's all helpful to the long-term protection of value.
Thank you. I'm conscious of just a couple of minutes left. Luis, tell us, rights values up and down, or indeed, what are you seeing on how we treat with the consumers?
Yeah, I think definitely on the rights. I think the domestic rights will still keep, let's say, higher value. I'll say international rights, I'm pretty sure will decrease, and that will be a problem for many rights holders. In the big sports, I think. Definitely, there's also an opportunity for more digital products. Again, we've been seeing, for instance, now, when I'm not wanting to interfere with one of the next sessions, here today at World Football Summit. But what happened with Maicujo in Brazil this weekend is a great example. So again, despite all the problems with the payment, solution that they were using, there was still 120,000 people that bought a semi-final, real cup game from Flamengo, right? Which for me is an amazing, result, right? How can actually people pay 10 reais per game? For me is unbelievable. Now it's astonishing. So there is definitely a lot of opportunities for the product goes more direct to consumer and be monetizable. which I think is also good news for the rights holders. I will say that, in terms of consumer behaviors, I think definitely we're going to get, consumers demanding a lot more for their time investment. They want more from rights holders. They want more from media companies. So we need to definitely improve delivery and reward them for their time.
Great. Well, I think we are pretty much out of time, so I won't have a chance to go to Ralf or Ricardo to ask those questions. Actually, guys, give me a pointing finger. A rights value is going to go up or down?
I need to give them the chance. Give them the chance, Richard. Give them the chance, because we're a democratic panel, so everybody has the right to speak. Ricardo has also to do his Coca-Cola endorsement.
Always up. Yeah, there we go. He's got the Coke drink. He's drunk the Coke. Everybody's happy.
I'm with Luis. It's gonna be mixed, but because I believe in business basically, and if I look at Sky in Germany, they're not making money right now, so they will need to be able to make money. And if Peter would make money on sports content, he would pay a shitload of it. So there's trouble to make more money on the rights now, and that's why I don't think that they're going to go dramatically up.
Ricardo, any last thoughts?
The right holders that can accommodate faster and provide value to partners, they will be able to charge more. If you try to use the same strategies that you used in the last 5 years, the rights are going to go down. So it's possible to go up. It really depends on each and every one of the right holders to do a better job in delivering value.
So a lot of sports are going to need to learn to adapt in order to either thrive or in some cases just survive.
Fantastic.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for steering the conversation so brilliantly. In terms of a very brief recap, but before we go to a break, you mentioned that at the start, Richard, one of the winners was music artists going online. You probably saw the collaboration between Travis Scott and Fortnite as a really inventive, interesting way of trying to get a new audience to consume what you make. I'm going to sort of take that and riff with it, if you pardon the pun, because I mentioned on Twitter when I was watching this session, I did a screen grab and I said, we've got the band back together, but obviously with a new songwriter, which is you, Richard. But what's happened here is that the often difficult second album has proved even better than the debut album. I would say that this has been an even better conversation. We had some new tracks there talking about Peloton and Zwift and the explosion on Facebook, mention of Overtime, that Gen Z focused model. And then we looked at things like Olympic athletes and creating content, some more sort of traditional themes there. Collaboration is the key to find the solutions. And then I wondered whether, would the drummer and the lead singer round on the bass player, and that's, of course, Peter Hutton, because there was some strong inquisition on Facebook and their role within the sports industry, but a robust defense talking about branded content, ad revenue, shares, audience development, and so on and so forth. But of course, sometimes you need these kind of creative collisions to produce your best work when you're in a band, and that's exactly what happened here. A little bit on women's football, gaming, we talked to with Ralf, of course, and saying that it is a complementary gaming strategy. It's not opposition. Again, it's collaboration, echoed by Ricardo from a brand point of view as well. And like all good bands, an expletive at the end there from Ralf too. So wonderful. We've kind of covered all the different bases and all the boxes are ticks. Really, really appreciate it. It was excellent conversation. So many, many thanks to all our contributors there. Of course, Luis, Peter, Ralf, and Ricardo and Richard for moderating so expertly. Okay, we're going to take a prolonged break and we'll return at 17:40 CEST, that's Central European Summertime, with our final panel today on day 2 of WFS Live powered by Ronaldo, which is on data in sports. So go get yourself a cup of tea or go and answer that urgent email, and we'll see you a bit later on.